No, because I just got off an airplane, huh, Laura? I guess we have some agenda here. I would like to welcome you to the 13th, the 14th meeting. Yes, we only have like 6, 7 more to come. Meeting of the ESSA task force. Thank you all for coming out tonight. First part of our agenda consists of an update and topic. And so I'm going to turn it over to Donna.
Great. That's nice. Thank you.
Rich Coleman's on the line, by the way. Karen. Rich Coleman's on the line, just so you know. He texted me to let you know that he is
On the phone.
Okay.
Hi, this is Allison Crider Brown. I'm on the line.
Hi, Allison.
I wasn't sure if they're not first. Yes.
Oh.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I always feel bad sitting down because I feel like I can't see everyone. So I'm not sure you can hear me either. It's great to be back. Donna Johnson, Director of Accountability with OSSE. Just a few updates for you. As you know, our launch date is growing closer and closer. I'm not even going to utter the number of days before, so.
I can do it for you if that's helpful.
No, please don't. Not right now. There is still a lot to be done. So tonight we are going to give you an update on the report card timeline. I believe this will be the first overview of the school improvement designations that will be made this winter and talk about the funding opportunity related to those school improvement designations. And then talk about what the role will be of our greater education community in developing plans related to school improvement. So all of you have a copy of this slide deck. So this is just a real quick overview of some of the outreach and information and engagement that we have done to date. So if you think back to where we were talking about just last month with the number of meetings that we were in the process of setting up, at this point, we have done a large number of those meetings. In fact, Shauna is doing a meeting in Ward 8 right now. And we have a meeting in Ward 1 scheduled on Thursday, another meeting scheduled on Friday, and we've had meetings every week. So as you can see, we're really trying to get out and meet with different community groups, education councils, ANCs, engaging as many and as often as we can. So you've got a quick overview there of the information. Just last week, we were able to engage with DCPS principals, provide some information and opportunity for Q&A there. Hansul sat with the chancellor and talked about some of the information that was upcoming. So, and I know she did the same with charter leaders earlier that morning. So we're excited about the work that's coming, but we know that we have a lot left to do as we move forward towards our early December launch. Couple little updates here on resources and tools. We are finalizing a large amount of resources that our goal is to have live on our website by the final week of November. Right now we have our at a glance, which all of you have seen and received copies of. Our brochures are in the final stage of being able to be loaded on our website. We have our FAQs, which Justin has copies of, and we'll present to those, and you guys can take those out with you. They will be loaded on our website by the end of the week, so you're getting an advance copy of some of those. They're also being styled so that it's not just a multiple page download PDF, but it's actually a website where you can see all of the questions, you can click on it and click right to that, so it's much more of a usable tool online. We have also developed a sample letter for schools to send to families and that they can integrate their information, but it gives them something to start with around information of how to share the information about the school report card. We've also developed PowerPoint deck that schools can utilize and integrate when they're talking about the report card and the STAR framework, so that they're not starting from scratch and that they've got common information and common tools that they're able to integrate into their messaging. We have 2 videos which will be live, hopefully before we go live, if not when we go live. And one is about the report card and one is about the STAR framework. I saw the final animated version of one of them today, and it just was very exciting. So we're looking forward to being able to share those. Unfortunately, we're not at a point where we can share them quite yet, but it is all real, and we're excited that they're coming across the finish line. Last but not least, one of the things we talked about was how are we going to support our LEA leaders and our principals as they're reviewing this data in advance of launch. So we had talked about an embargoed period with our LEA leaders, just like we do with a number of other data releases that we have. And then looking at how we can support that for principals as well. So we've developed 2 different applications. One is related to the STAR framework. One is related to non-STAR framework report card elements. Those will be provided to LEA leaders this Friday, and then to principals on the 26th. That is student level data. So it's embargoed data that goes all the way down to the student level. So it definitely has data protection and privacy constraints to it, which is why it's not a public facing document. All of that information at the non-student level will be presented as part of the report card, but this is an opportunity for our LEAs and our school leaders to be able to get a look at that data and be able to see what it means for their school and help them develop their messaging as well. We are doing a training webinar for the STAR application framework, or the STAR framework application. That will be available and live for all LEA leaders and principals. We're also going to be hosting a questions and support webinar on 11/27 for all principals, but obviously LEA leaders could tune into that as well. It will be geared towards principals on the 27th. And then we will be recording and releasing to the public a model school recorded video walkthrough of a mock-up of the report card, so talking about the functionality of the report card with fake data. So it's going to actually show you before we launch our report card site what to anticipate, what it looks like, and how it's modeled. We'll be recording that the week of 11/26 and put that out on our website. We'll also be sending it to all of you. That's something that we had talked about last month as well. Questions there? Yes.
Question.
Or I can go.
Okay, I'll defer to the ladies. Okay.
I was just gonna ask you about the webinar for the principals. Can we also be a part of that?
Because that is dealing with applications that you don't have access to, that webinar will be about the STAR application.
Okay.
So we cannot give you access to that because that involves student level data access.
Okay.
So that just wouldn't be appropriate.
Do you think the FAQ is going to go live Friday morning by any chance?
It will be live by the end of this week. I don't know an exact time. We will work our best. Hopefully.
No, we just would send it out on Friday, but we will
Yes.
not send it out on Friday.
I will let you know as soon as it
Oh,
does.
it's fine.
Yes.
That's why I asked. Like,
Yep,
for
as
planning
soon as it
purposes.
does, yeah. Josh?
I want to start by just thanking you for this sort of like multi-pronged approach to like getting the information out there with the videos and the PowerPoints and the letters and stuff. I have 2 follow-up questions. One is on the recorded video walkthrough. I assume that it's going to be like something that looks at the online version, but the browser-based version.
Yes.
I know that a lot of our families in different parts of the city access mostly things through the mobile view, and I don't know if the mobile view of the website looks different than the browser-based version, in which case we might want to have like a model school recorded walkthrough just to like, here's how you look at this stuff on a phone or tablet instead. And then I know this will be...
Explanation, I'll add that to my to-do list.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
And then you are going to have this out before EdFest?
That's correct.
And then will there be like at EdFest, sort of like last year with the My School DC people, will there be like lots of stations where people can like with computers and stuff to access all this stuff and meet?
OSSE has a dedicated table or 2 tables at manifest, so we will have computers, tablets for which people can experience it. I'm not sure if there are other computers spread out that people can access it, but I can check on that. If there are, they'll be able to access the report card for sure. But we'll be walking people through it at the OSSE tables for people who haven't experienced it yet.
Yeah, I can just see like an ongoing, like every 30 minutes, we're doing a demonstration live, and then people like, maybe that takes 5 to 10 minutes, and the next 20 minutes, that group of people is just like accessing it, and then just cycle it over again as a potential way to like engage people at the fest.
I'll take that back because I'm gonna find out kind of what those the computers and not having been there before. I need to follow up and see whose little station might that be and who would we go to find out. It's a great idea. Any other questions? Great. School improvement. So one of the things that all of you are aware of is that as part of the Every Student Succeeds Act, OSSE must designate our low-performing schools with 2 different designations. There is the comprehensive support and targeted support. Those schools that are identified as comprehensive support, because of the rationale that they are in the bottom 5% on the STAR framework, will become eligible to apply for additional funds. OSSE is dedicating $11 million over 3 years to help address the specific needs and identified needs for those lowest performing schools. Yes, Josh?
Are these competitive or formula or both?
They are not competitive if a school qualifies as, so they are a comprehensive school within the bottom 5%. They will need to fill out the grant application. They will have to meet the criteria that's established in that grant application, but it is not based on a formula or a competition as to who fills out the application better. If you're identified, a certain amount of money is designated towards that school. It's about $1 million per school over 3 years. All they have to do is fill out the application, meet the minimum bars that are established in there in terms of establishing that plan and meeting the criteria that's established in the law.
So if you're a small, like, primary school serving 300 students, or you're a larger high school serving 1,500 students, is that the same amount?
That is my understanding. Is that right, Justin?
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
How many schools are gonna be in the bottom 5?
It's the bottom 5%, so based on the total number of schools, that's approximately 10 schools. So we have 197 schools that receive a STAR framework rating. So bottom 5% of that is 10 schools.
It's divided by grade band, which I always think is really helpful to think of.
So yes and no. So bottom 5% high schools and the bottom 5% of elementary, middle schools combined together, because we do have a large number of schools that serve both elementary and middle, and those metrics are pretty much the same with the exception of those schools that have pre-K. So it's looking at elementary, middle, and then looking at high school. So looking at the bottom 5% of those 2 sectors, if you will.
So this is, the million is over 3 years?
Correct.
And are there other supports that DCPS or someone else is providing to?
My
the
answer
bottom
is
performing?
yes, of course, but I can't speak to what those are. That's really something that DCPS and other LEAs that would be identified, so charter LEAs would be able to speak to. But yes, I mean, that's funding support is one thing, but additional programmatic supports and capacity supports, those are all things that's really up to the LEA and looking at the needs assessment that school and LEA create together.
Because, I mean, this is a pretty serious issue here, these bottom 5%.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, our students are depending on us getting this right and making sure that we are doing all that we can collectively to help our schools improve. So, that's one of the things is our students can't wait, right? We have to make sure that we're doing everything we can and that all of our decisions are student-centered so that we're moving together and we're moving together in that work. And it's not something that $1 million will fix. It's not something that one entity can fix alone. It truly is a collective work of all of us working together to help our students.
So that's what I was trying to understand, is what is all that working together?
Yeah, so when we take a look at what the plans have to look like and what they have to do to engage the community, that might answer some of your questions, but I'd be happy to Alex?
Is there technical assistance for completing the grant frameworks for the schools at the bottom 5%? I mean, these are schools who are administratively struggling already, and the grant application may not be in the cards for the school administration or the LEA, depending. And then I guess the follow-up question is, if the school fails to complete the required minimum bars, the money is question mark.
So if there is technical assistance, I think it would depend on what level of assistance. OSSE is not going to be able to write the grant for them, but to the extent that we might be able to direct them to assistance or provide them funding to bring in that type of support, so early funding assistance, those things are allowable. In terms of what happens if a school chose not to apply for the grant, then that would be a decision that we would have to take a look at and say, okay, so now with those funds that are earmarked for school improvement, how do we utilize those in the best interest of those schools that are working in this plan, or how do we use those to in some way support that school in a different fashion or something. So I think that's to be determined. Our hope is that all of those schools will take advantage of that opportunity.
So are there suggested
I'll get to that.
criteria of what they should be doing with these funds? Because
Limited some, I'll get to it in just a minute. So, oh, sorry. And I might answer some of these questions as we go through, but I know you've got the PowerPoint in front of you, so maybe not.
Sort of bridges the two, I guess.
Okay.
So, in the sense that, what is the messaging around one-star schools and two-star schools? Like, what is that going to be? Like, what context is OSSE going to be providing to parents about the limitations of the star rating? Kind of what? I mean, like, I know they're going to see the big picture, but I think 1 and 2-star schools are going to need support in kind of helping parents frankly get past the stars a little bit, because stars are not everything that's on that report card. So how are we messaging that people should be not just like walking past the tables of all schools at 1-star, being like, no, I love my kids, I don't hate them. Like, why would I bring my kid to a 1-star school? Because that means I hate my child. So like, what are we doing to message that? I guess, like, what effort is going to be made to, because they're going to need support. And part of the problem is they're going to start losing enrollment. Like, that's what all of us fear who work in schools that know we're probably on that list somewhere. And that it's real hard to improve, even with a nice $300,000 grant, if we're losing $500,000, $1 million because we're just dropping enrollment. There's, we're going in a death spiral, potentially. I mean, that's what we're kind of physically facing for some of these schools. And so I guess what effort is going to be made by OSSE to help, like, we respect that the stars mean something, but it is a certain, like, it's only so much of the whole picture of what makes a school, but it's hard to look past it because it's a real fancy symbol that we're all very attuned to, that we've talked about a lot here. So what is being done for the messaging for those schools that are good to help with messaging?
So one of the things that I'm hearing is that concern around 1 and 2-star schools, and I want to be very, very clear, because we are talking about school improvement, that a star rating does not equate to a designation of school improvement. So to respect your question, I would like to address your question in its totality around how we're messaging and releasing information about the report card separately than talking about school improvement, because I think one of the services that we do is equating school improvement designation with a school that receives a 1-star rating. So I want to make sure that we're very clear that they're not one and the same.
Well,
Is that
because
okay?
some of us are going to be 1-stars that won't be receiving anything because we're
That
at
is
the
true.
bottom of the 1-star rating, but we're going to be still a 1-star school and still get
Yes.
all the repercussions of it.
Yeah, so
Without any
if we can finish talking about school improvement and then talk about messaging for ratings as well as the other components on the report card, I'll be happy to share the way we've been having these discussions in communities around the city. Joshua, a question? No, thank you. Just a quick overview of the 3 types of designations. We have Comprehensive Support 1, which we've been talking about completely. And those are the bottom 5% of schools, as we talked about already. We have separated those grade bands. So looking at high school, bottom 5%, looking at elementary and middle combined together, 5%. Also, we have comprehensive support 2, which are high schools that have an 4-year and 5-year ACGR, which is our graduation rate. So looking at that cohort of 4-year and 5-year cohort graduation rates that are below 67%. So these are all things that are defined within the Every Student Succeeds Act. We also have targeted support schools. So the targeted support schools, for those that, how many people are very familiar with what the targeted support designation is? Fantastic. Great. It is a teachable moment. I will lean on those other leaders in the classroom to help us. But targeted support is actually probably one of the more confusing and misunderstood components of designation. When we think about targeted support, it really is looking at that part of the Every Student Succeeds Act that is that equity driver, that's talking about, are all of our student groups achieving, or are there gaps in performance between specific student groups? We might have a school who, when you look at the all student group, they're hitting it out of the park. But when you look at their students with disability, that group at that school is significantly lower than our lowest performing schools across the city. And that's how it's defined as a targeted support school. So if they have a defined student group, that their student group score is performing lower than the overall score of our lowest performing 5% of schools, those subgroups within that school are designated as targeted support. Does that seem a little bit more clear? Josh, Aaron, Juliana, anything to add there?
That sounds right.
We could get a little deeper and talk about TS2 and TS3 in future years, but there's no need for that right now.
The cut scores are also broken out by the high school and then elementary and middle.
Correct.
Piece.
Yes. So what she's referring to is when we talk about that bottom 5%, that threshold by which we identify is that star score of the highest scoring of the bottom 5%. So we're looking at the highest scoring of the bottom 5% in elementary middle and the highest scoring of the bottom 5% in high school. And the student groups within.
So
I'll be happy to say what those are.
Translated for an example, say the lowest score of the bottom 5%, or the highest score of the
So, for
bottom
example,
5% is like 14, then any school, like if that's an elementary middle school, it's 14. If any elementary middle school has a subgroup whose star score is below 14
Correct.
or below,
Correct.
they would be identified for targeted support for that subgroup.
Absolutely. So to even clarify that example even more. So let's say that the last school in our elementary middle group that is identified as a comprehensive support 1 school. Let's say their score, as Josh said, is 14. That's their star score for their school. We then look at all of our student group scores. So that's each race, ethnicity, students with disabilities, at-risk, English learners. We look at all of those groups. If any of those student group scores are below or equal to 14, then that school for that student group is identified as targeted support. Questions?
So this is just in the bottom 5% that you identify?
No, this is looking at all of our schools. Are any of our student groups performing lower than the bottom 5% is performing overall? Josh?
And so, but there are no financial resources to help schools implement their plans, is that correct?
There are no designated school improvement resources. That does not mean that there are not any financial resources. OSSE has a large number of grants that they have flexibility to be able to direct resources in that, but we don't have an earmarked bucket of funds for targeted support. that doesn't mean that we can't direct other grants and funds to help in those areas. So like students with disabilities, doesn't mean that we can't direct additional funds to schools that are working to address targeted support needs for students with disabilities in the flexibility that we have.
Great, so are we gonna do that?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, that makes
Yes.
sense, right? That makes sense.
Yes. Yes.
Since we can, are we, and you said yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
If we can do more to help students and schools that are addressing these needs, we will do everything that we can to do that. Erin.
Resources for CS2 schools who don't have a graduation rate of 67%.
It would be utilizing some of the existing resources that we have. There's not an earmarked bucket of funds for CS2 the way there is for CS1. Yes, ma'am.
Are TS2 schools first being identified next year? Or are
3
you
years.
looking back?
TS2 is 3 years from now. Right? Is that wrong?
It's 2 out of 3 years. You're in the bottom.
There might be 2 out of, but bottom.
To get out.
Let me double check on that. We have a whole timeline. I was
Yeah.
next year
Let's
and the
stick
year
with
after. Yeah, let me
Well,
double check on
my
that.
question was also, were you looking back a year to get it 2 years? That's why I was asking for the year one. But that sounds like no.
No,
Okay.
because we don't have star data from 16, 17, so.
That's right.
Correct. We are only identifying TS1.
You have to approve to get
Yeah,
it.
if we're on track to identify TS2, yes, then we will. I'll double check.
Yes.
Yeah. Next year. That's a year 2 question.
Some of us are long.
I know.
Great.
Okay. So a couple of the questions have already elevated around what does this mean for this school? So what do they have to do? So specifically, if you're looking at it, you're looking at comprehensive support schools. So the first thing is those schools that are identified as comprehensive support 1 and comprehensive support 2 will do a needs assessment to look at what are the needs of their school and do a full assessment, and they will engage their stakeholders in that needs assessment. So engaging stakeholders under the law means that you're engaging your faculty, your leadership, your parents, your community. Yes.
Sorry, just because I have not read up on this as much as I should have, my apologies. Is that a part of the grant process, or is that a separate compliance requirement?
Yes.
Cool.
Does that answer it?
Yep.
Okay. And then, after doing the needs assessment, you will utilize that needs assessment to develop your plan. Once you have developed your plan, you then, as a school, submit that to your LEA for approval. So the LEA has to approve your plan. Your LEA is likely engaged every step of the way with you in developing that plan. So they should be right there with you and working on that. Once they've approved that plan, they send it to OSSE for final approval. If you are a charter school, you would also send that to PCSB for approval. And then PCSB will, in a kind of circular way, have that relationship with OSSE in order of approving that plan and having OSSE's approval as well. OSSE's role is then taking a look at that plan and doing periodic monitoring, checking in with the school and the LEA to address how they're progressing with the goals that they've established. One of the things that's very different about this system versus No Child Left Behind or other school improvement iterations that you may have experienced is that this system does not have a prescribed path that you have to go down. So you are not required to use one or to select one of 4 models if you are a school identified for comprehensive support, the way was the case when we had priority schools or in No Child Left Behind. You were given a very limited set of things that you could do. This is much more wide open and meeting the needs of the needs assessment. So one of the things that OSSE has done through their grant process is look at making sure that schools and LEAs are focusing their work within their plan in 3 different areas that are known drivers of school improvement. So those things are curriculum and instruction, the people, the staff, the support that's available, and then the structures of the school. Structures can be something from calendars, periods of day, way the school is configured. It's very broad for that purpose, but it also gives some constraints around 3 key areas that would be addressed for wholesale improvement and change within a school. Now, in taking a look at, just kind of looking at the timeline, so many of you are familiar with the school improvement grants from the past, or the 1003 or 1003G grants. So under the Every Student Succeeds Act, the 1003G changed, so it's not just 1003G. So we kind of moved away from using that language if that's what you're used to. Some people are just used to calling it SIG grants, things of that sort, so school improvement grants. So we're really looking at those dedicated school improvement funds and making sure that the development of these plans, the implementation of these plans, and then the oversight, monitoring, and support provide the structure that's needed to affect change, but doesn't impede a school or an LEA from being creative and thinking outside the box, but make sure that they have the resources and supports they need to implement that change, or in some cases, to change course. If they find over time that things that they thought would be effective aren't, that they have the additional supports and flexibility to redirect that as needed over those periods of time we're monitoring.
Can we go back to the question that Laura asked, because it's very likely these one-star schools are going to lose enrollment and lose more funding than what these grants are. Because, I mean, realistically, one of these grants will be like 3 positions at a school or something. So is there like enrollment stabilization funding? I don't know what the right word is to kind of be sure that they're just going to be in this spiral of losing students, and this grant is going to be less than what they might be getting if their enrollment is stable.
So a couple of things I want to address, since I told Laura I would come back to her question as well, is the way in which we have been communicating it. So we are not telling school leaders step for step how they should communicate about their school's rating, for the main purpose that your school earns its rating in a variety of ways. You may be a school that earns a 1-star for multiple reasons. So one message about a 1-star rating does not tell a school's story. But one of the things that we have been communicating at every town hall and every education council and ANC and community group that we connect with is talking about the report card as a whole, and talking about the information that is on that report card, which is more than a single star rating. And it's an opportunity to look at, engage in the data, ask questions, and engage with your school. And we've also been encouraging schools to have that same conversation, which was part of the reason why part of the resources that we developed was a school toolkit around how you can communicate that information. But telling the story of your school and communicating the strengths, as well as identifying the areas of weakness and improvement, that is really the responsibility of the school, not that responsibility of OSSE.
So I attended a PAVE, session where they were getting feedback from parents about the report card. And at the end of the meeting, there were 10 people in the room, and all 10 of those parents said that they would not apply to a 1-star school. They didn't care what else was available on information. The star rating was for them the be all and end all.
And so during the information gathering sessions where we gathered over 4,000 pieces of feedback from parents and community on both what should go into the report card as well as the language. And I think from what you're describing, it sounds like you attended one of the sessions that was talking about how information is presented, so what type of language was utilized. And what I've really been talking about is how we've been going out and talking about the report card as we're preparing for it to go live. So the engagement conversation, I think, while that's great information to have, I know that it's not the message that we have been bringing out, and It's also, you know, information that we're sharing. We're talking about this is how to utilize the report card, and looking at the fact that while the information in the STAR framework is one component of the report card, we also know it's not the sole story of a school.
And I know that's what you want to happen. I'm just saying in reality, that may not be what happens.
I was just gonna say, as a parent, when I think about it, we think we have these low-performing schools, that those parents are at a certain level and they understand symbols. So you're talking about stars and you're talking about ratings. And I understand what you're saying and how you're looking at everything holistically. But think about a parent that's a high school dropout. All they're gonna see is a star. So I think that, as you said, that the schools are gonna be communicating that message, that's not a part of what you're doing, but take that back to them, like that's gonna be very, very important, because symbols mean something.
But I also think that a parent that has a master's degree will look at that one star and think, I'm not gonna send my child to that school too.
Yeah.
So I think it's that language is pretty clear across the board. People look at stars and they look at it as a measure of, you know, a choice. And that's just where we are. DC's a choice city, and people really take advantage of that. And so I think that, I know that we're saying this is the message, but I think people are saying repeatedly, session after session, people are not gonna take it like that. They're gonna take it how they want to. And I know that we wanna be in a situation where we're trying to make sure that message is clear, but I'm just saying that that has to be part of a deeper conversation as we go forward.
Thank you.
Allison, on the phone, and I wanted to hear more details about this. I hear some of the questions you're saying, but I'd love to get written out, because there's a lot of questions, like, is the school gets this 1 year, is this a 3-year investment, is it renewed every single year? So I just have a lot of questions, and then to piggyback on the conversation about how parents will are one of the things that I heard is kind of listening to parents and what's Designate, that some of our schools are dealing with the issue of not being able to get substitutes, because substitutes are passing over on students, and so then what's happening is the music teacher, the art teacher, the science teacher, because they know the students, they're being pulled into the classroom as substitutes, which means that I know we've had at my daughter's school, some of the grades have not had special, like for extended period of time, because those special teachers have been pulled to substitute. So there's a lot that is riding on these stars that is also going to be, and pretty much going to be how parents do their schools. But there's other implications, and looking at, you know, these school improvement plans, if your school falls into this, but, you know, you have all your special teachers who are constantly pulled different places. I'm just curious and would like to request more written information on this.
So let me address the one question that I did hear that is definitely something I can answer very easily for you, and that is a question that is really a question about designation with respect to the law. So comprehensive support 1 schools are identified every 3 years. That funding is set for 3 years based on the progress of the school's performance on the plan that they have established. Each state has the opportunity to extend that designation if they're seeing significant progress for an additional year. So that's something that is considered as you approach those timelines. A couple other things that I want to clarify with respect to some of the questions around what's required for those comprehensive support schools is that in addition to the needs assessment with the community, we've talked about that, there's also a resource allocation that is required. So that is where every LEA that has a school designated for comprehensive support will review how the expenditures for all of the schools in their LEA are distributed, and then look at that in terms of how are they using both state, federal, local funding and allocating funding to do a true resource allocation analysis to look at where they can redirect or may have some flexibilities for funding for those comprehensive support schools. We've talked a little bit about making the plan, but it really is then utilizing that needs assessment and the resource allocation to build that together with the feedback that they receive from their communities in order to develop that plan. I alluded a little bit to this slide in talking about where OSSE's grant would target, and I mentioned curriculum instruction, people, and structures. And when you look at this slide, it gives a little bit of an outline of some of the areas that we would be encouraging schools to focus their plans in those directions, recognizing that research shows that these 3 areas have the opportunity and the ability to affect significant change. Looking at the timeline, so right now, did they go live on Friday? Okay, on Friday, we released the LEA application with questions and templates on, and those were posted on the website, or
On our website.
it is posted on the website. That includes.
LEA is also got an email from the Assistant Superintendent of Education.
So this includes the needs assessment, the resource equity analysis, and what the details for the school improvement plan would look like. In December, when we release the new report card and release the star ratings, we will also announce those schools receiving those 3 school designations, CS1, CS2, and TS1. In February, LEAs that have CS1 schools will need to submit their grant application. We're calling that the Investment in Schools Grant, in order to receive the funding if they want to submit it earlier. So one of the questions that was asked is saying, hey, this is a real basic template. If I can fill this out and turn in the money, can I get some early funding to be able to help develop my plan? That is exactly what's outlined in there. This is not a heavy lift for schools and LEAs. It's not something that needs a grant writer. This is really something that your school leader, the staff within your school, have the ability to bring community together and hammer out in a very simplistic way, and then work on developing what that plan looks like. And then by May, LEAs that have a CS1 school will need to submit their needs assessment, their resource equity analysis, and their school improvement plan. Earlier submission is definitely encouraged if possible, but it's also not something that we want schools to rush through and not fully think through. We also recognize that some schools that have been underperforming for a long period of time have already started in this conversation about what can we do to address the needs for students in our schools. And this may be something that they are already working in the path of.
Are those all public documents?
They are. And they're available on the OSSE website.
Oh, sorry, I mean the completed ones by the schools.
Oh, the plans.
I think we have to make them available, yes, they will be.
Also on PCSB's website, yeah, for charters.
Yes.
I'm not sure exactly how to frame my question, but it's around, it's hearing the conversation about how do we talk about 1 and 2-star schools, acknowledging that that's a hard conversation. Not that I necessarily have a problem with it being out there. That's public information. Parents will make their choices. But for the staff and the leaders at those schools, you know, we talk about students who are behind and how we give them put it so like a growth mindset and wanting to improve and giving them concrete things that we will celebrate along the way towards their improvement to being proficient. How are we going to do the same thing for schools that are in this 1 and 2-star bucket to give them some sort of because they won't be overnight that they move from 1 to 3 to 1 to 4 stars, but if they are making progress within those 3 years, in what ways is ICE going to incentivize and give some sort of positive feedback to the schools that do end up in this designation in this first year, but take it and then run with it and improve. How are we going to talk about that? How are we going to designate that? That's what I don't know that you necessarily have an answer for that, but I think maybe that is something that this group can, as a group, come up with ideas for, because I think that that's important to give the schools that end up in these designations something to shoot for in the next 3 years, and get some sort of credit if they meet those goals.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with you. And, it's not a question I planted, but I'm very excited to get it because it's something that we've been talking about as well. When we've been out in the community talking about, what's the use of the report card, what's the use of the STAR framework, and one of the things that you see on all of our printed documents is that this is is an opportunity to celebrate successes as well as direct supports for improvement. That celebration of successes is important, and we recognize that a celebration of success is not just looking at an overall STAR score. And that's something that we are planning, and that I don't have all the details to tell you today, but it's definitely something that we have the timeline in terms of rolling that out and looking at what the successes look like. What do the successes look like in terms of celebrating significant growth, looking at significant performance in certain student groups, and really trying to highlight some of those areas where we're seeing significant gains in areas where traditionally there's been high underperformance, and being able to recognize that. So that's something that we are definitely planning to do. That whole concept of designation is definitely something that we have been talking about within our offices as well. Is there an opportunity after we get into year 2 and year 3 to be able to create a designation of sort of like a rewarding or some type of way to really celebrate those successes in a more formal way. So that's definitely something that we are investigating and talking about. So thank you for that, because it's nice to hear that that's something that might be supported out there as well. But in terms of celebrating immediate successes for the first year, we do have plans of going out in the community and celebrating and identifying those areas where we're seeing significant successes, especially some of those areas that might be some great successes that we're seeing in schools that have a overall 2-star rating, or even some areas that we have schools that may have a 1-star rating, but we're seeing some areas of incredible success in certain pockets of performance, and that's important to highlight. And even if it's not highlighting them with a banner or a trophy, it's definitely something to be able to message, to talk about, and to create that information with school leadership as well.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
I mean, seriously, thank you. I mean, unless there's some really serious questions, we have some more items on the agenda, and they've already had the time with the answer. I mean, I know we're all concerned about the STAR rating and the implication. So I think we heard you say that they will look at that and try to do some different things, and they will be back. Okay, this is not the last time we will see them. Thank you.
We also passed out what our draft of what the FAQs will look like when they go live at the end of the week. We might touch those up a little bit. They're still in our draft. That's where we are, pretty close to final. So those are where we're.
Thank you. This FYI, on November 28th, the State Board of Education is holding what are we holding? Well, we have a teacher and principal forum on, I didn't remember the name, I'm bad with names, so I apologize. On November 28th from 6 to 8 at the Walker Jones Education campus. This is going to be something that we, in case you don't know, the State Board study of teacher turnover, teacher and principal turnover. And so this is a follow-up on that. We want teachers, parents, students to come out and sit down and talk around a table to try to come up with some impact, how we can do something to turn this situation around and what we feel is best for our students. So we're inviting you to participate in this forum. Again, it's on November 28th from 6 to 8 at the Walker Jones Education campus. So we'd like to see as many of you there as possible. Any questions about that? Okay. You have to forgive me, I just got off a plane, an airplane, and I was a little tired. So now, we understand that this is a 2-year task force. After the report card is released, then we have 6 months to go. So what are we going to do with our 6 months that we have after the report card is released? Well, we've come up with some ideas, and those are our committees. You know, we have 3 committees, and so we have the opportunity to meet and come up with some strategy of what kind of information we want to investigate and how we want to frame it and what we want to change in the system and how we can affect that change. So tonight, we will break down into our 3 committees, which are the equity for, there they are, academic equity, So if you have a yellow star circle on your thing, you go to room 1113, school resources and funding equity breakout, and that's in room 160. And leading for equity is in room 1117. We want you to start looking at what direction you would like to take your committee. And at our January meeting, we'll start trying to put some meat on the bones and move forward with some kind of recommendation or policy or whatever you all want. This is your opportunity to have some strategic input into these three areas. And we want you, the committee, to frame it. And each committee had a representative or spokesperson. I don't know if they're all here tonight, but if not, does someone come out and give us a breakout afterwards? We'd like to come back here after we finish the discussion. You have until 7:45. I told you to get off of one. From 7:45 to come back with your readouts. And the reason we want you to come back so we know where to take those notes and to solidify them for our January meeting. Any questions? Okay, let's go.
Karen, this is Rich on the phone. Question here.
Yes.
First question is, what's the plan for involving those of us on the line?
So if you are on the line, you're actually in the group that is staying in this room, so just stick on the line and we will gather everyone around the phone.
Did you hear that?
Okay.
Then stay where you are. Okay. Any other questions?
My other question is this, what the committees are doing, are there any
What?
If they need to see what the committee's doing, that's what I've heard.
I'm sorry you broke up. We didn't hear what your statement.
What's the deliverables at wide open as well?
The deliverables are what the committee feels they want to attack or look at. We're not dictating what the academic equity committee goals and objectives are. We want you all to tell us what you want, and then we will help facilitate those goals.
I'm struggling with that and have been because I feel like with that was a parameter, like things to go way beyond what I feel the charge is of the group as a whole, let alone the subcommittees, which I think makes it difficult for us when we do breakouts to understand what the breadth of items
are. Okay.
I don't want to over-promise and under-deliver, but I don't still want to be under-thinking and being under-utilized.
I don't know how to answer that.
That's something I could,
Go
we
ahead.
can talk about that in the committee, once we break down in about 2 minutes. Does that work?
Did you hear? Hello?
Yeah, I heard. I guess it's, yeah, that's sure. I'm a little concerned that we're to the stage, like we're 2/3 of the way through these, and I'm getting anxious of the time we've spent so far and the lack of clarity around the deliverables. Like I don't want to overpromise from our committee perspective. I don't want to under-deliver from what we're trying to accomplish. And I just feel like some time from minor point might be helpful before the next meeting, where we're being asked to put forward items that we want to work on and materialize before the end of the term.
I agree with you. So once we have some idea of what you're interested in, we'll take the next month to try to fine tune it before our January meeting. Before our January meeting. Okay. So we will. All right. So come back at. Come back at at 7:30. I want to keep on dating at 11. I'm tired. That's just fine.
If you don't tell that story,
We are students to stars. I'm sorry, I don't look, you know,
There's
I'm
this really
taking
interesting,
stars.
there's this really interesting article I found about video games about how there's a very non-linear rating in most rating systems where the vast majority of the scores are within the top 10% of score options. Even if they're actually a low scoring option, right? Maybe they're second to last on the list. They're still in the top 40% of the rating system. Because it goes basically like this. Like a bad video game is an 8 out of 10. Right? Or a bad Uber is a 4 out of 5.
the thing is, you just can't create everything and say, okay, you guys are welcome, you guys are welcome. You have to have support. I'm like, okay, so that has a whole component in it. Like, do it, we're talking about it now, what it means. We have got things that we know, and we're actually having games about it. What we're going to say, how we're going to support.
Part of it is also
all that kind of stuff.
ECDS operating within the mayor's framework, and even if they have a big department who's dedicated to
I was just gonna comment, we're still.
Yep,
They have
thanks for your patience.
so our liaisons
We're
are on
now-
their own. Like, yeah, they'll put a nice bus out up for us, which we've been for years.
So,
Yeah.
Allison, I didn't know if you had a chance to look at the committee materials on the
They're
Google
not
Doc.
gonna stand up
between,
and-
you know, our email this afternoon.
Because the mayor has a story she wants to tell right now, and it's not gonna help us.
Meet with our parents, we're gonna meet with our.
I figured I was in mine.
Conversation,
As soon as I got home.
conversation or just not conversation?
I mean, like, we're gonna get walked through it, it's gonna be the dominant narrative, and we're gonna have to stand up and on our own. Because the stars aren't it. Instead, our school's busy obsessing about the stars.
So I'm just
It's like,
gonna try.
yeah, it's not it. It's like,
You know,
we gotta tell them something else.
I think the
It's not
staff-
gonna help us, ever.
I agree. I think the sad thing is that this is all being driven to me by the parents.
Okay.
Meaning like, the only reason even charter schools are so popular in DC, it's like half charter schools, is because a lot of the parents did not want their child going into certain environments that they felt were unsafe. So the fact that there are some parents who feel good knowing,
You know, parents came out against the stars being the way they are. So heavy on testing. Right, like, parents did, I have a lot to say on that. We lost. That was 2.5 years ago. What can you do? Now we're stuck with it, yeah.
It's gonna be very interesting. I think this mainly
We're having some trouble on the line here. I just want to make sure that it may be on our end of the connection, but like, can you go again?
Alright, well, I'm gonna hang up because I'm frustrated technology wise and have 6 other things going on, so I'm trying to catch up with.
Yeah, can I email you tonight or tomorrow? Maybe we can just find a little time to chat on the table.
Yeah, that's right. That's not for the conference room picking up on the other conversations in the room. It's just, we can hear everything going on in the room as a microphone placement, and it's not reflective of, I'm sure, the conversation you're having in the room.
But I mean, honestly, here's what I'm getting at, is like, that's the only annoying thing that's happened since.
There could be a cutoff point.
Okay, sounds good.
That, you know, these schools don't run really bad to say kids and, but,
Okay, so,
I mean, but that's the conclusion, yeah, I would want to know. I would know.
We've had some interesting learning opportunities. New students with very complex presentations.
all right, so if I could just, I don't want to get in here, but I just wanted to turn everybody's attention for the 20 minutes that we have here. Just to, back to the Google Doc. So the last time these committees met, which was in September, we talked briefly about sort of a draft idea of a committee goal, of a purpose for what we would want to do with this small group. And I think at the time it was just sort of like, it was very speculative, but I think we got a lot of feedback. I tried to incorporate all of it into the Google Doc that's in front of right here now. And we're just trying to see if in this meeting and the next meeting we can try to come to a little bit of more of a consensus on what we'd like to do in this committee. I think Rich, who is not on the phone right now, but we'll catch up with him offline. I think he, this is something that he was concerned about, was just generally the scope of what we might be able to accomplish in the next 6 months, because we have 6 meetings between now and June, and then then we're done. So the question would be not to try and bite off more than we can chew in terms of like what's feasible, what can be accomplished, but also what's interesting and what would be meaningful for the group. Having participated in this task force, what would you like to see come out of it? So that's the purpose of the discussion tonight. Is just to try and get closer to that. To say, now that we've been in this thing long enough, and we've had a chance to learn from OSSE, and we've had a chance to have a little bit of a discussion about equity. Where do we go from here, both in the small group, but then also when we come back, we'll hear from the other groups too about what they're doing.
I guess I want to know what realistically can be accomplished, like what is the parameters of our power, so that it can be more focused. Because I can start thinking of some big radical stuff. It's like what's happening, So I want, like, what do you think is, or maybe if you can suggest like an example of stuff that is realistically something that our group can.
Definitely. Well, maybe, and I will do that. Maybe could I start? Like, would you mind sharing sort of the big radical goals? Just as a, if we could do anything, like what you would do.
Well, I mean, one of the big radical goals, which I'm totally against, I don't believe, but it was like surveys, you know what I'm saying? And then that was something where it's like, oh, we should have surveys and be a part of the report card system, so that blah, blah, blah. That's not feasible. So then that's pretty much a scrapped idea. Right. And I can see why it might not be feasible. So it's kind of like, what are some things like, can we make recommendations with like the idea of like maybe discipline or things like that, which like I think that's a part of leading to equity, equitous kind of discipline or things, I don't know.
So I totally agree with you that we need to narrow the scope. I have a first thing that I want to ask, which is last time we met, one of the things that was brought up was the composition of people on this team, and I didn't see that in the notes, and so I didn't write anything about it in the notes, but still merits mentioning.
Yep. I will catch up with you about that too.
Cool. I figured I didn't.
Not unnoticed.
Okay, I didn't write anything in the notes because I was like, I bet that whoever was writing notes intentionally left this out of it. So, in terms of actually promoting the conversation, in terms of focusing on what can we do, I mean, the thing that stands out to me, especially with the experts, myself not included, but Rich and you guys, in terms of the amount of time and work you've done in school leadership in the city, especially as this task force relates to implementation of ESSA and that conversation we just had in this room of all of those people who are involved in schools at the parent or teacher level were really saying, how does a school leader respond to a one-star rating? And I think that's where we may actually have power as a group that's composed of a lot of school leaders to say, here's some advice on how you worry about publicity and worry about enrollment and worry about all of these things that those principals are going to be worrying about but may not have any idea of how to handle it. And that might be a big use of our time. I don't know.
Oh, like advising the principals.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say here's a big program or here's a policy change, but saying here's some best practices in what to do when you get the one-star rating, or what to do X, Y, and Z. Something that's maybe meaningful for a school leader to have a resource on or a list of points of contact. I'm not sure. I think it's a terrible idea.
It's an incredible hurdle to overcome.
Yeah.
Because every charter school has a board, and the boards are going to have their response. And in some ways, the response of the board can take away a school leader's opportunity because they very likely be held accountable. This is a piece where, as I listen to the conversation about what are schools to do when they get a 1 or 2 star, it's really worrisome because people are going to vote with their feet essentially.
Right.
And what can you say when a family says, I'm not interested in being in a school that's working on its problems? So I feel like I have very little to offer.
I just don't think I'm sorry. I don't think OSSE has really taken into account, because charter schools, as I was saying before, we already deal with tiering. So we kind of know or have an understanding of what it means to be ranked and to be very public about how we're ranked, either 1, 2, or 3 tier, which would be, if you're in a 3rd tier, 1 or 2 star. And so there's already that accountability, and there's already plans and things that are already in operation for those schools that get a tier 3 ranking. I know who they are, and we kind of know what's happening and everything. But for DCPS schools, for their very first time, to get these rankings and not have anything or any type of proactive communication or any type of support to address any of the issues, knowing that, as you were saying, Alex, people see them, they're going to walk. I mean, they're literally going to walk. And I think we need to be able to say, okay, if we're about equity, leading with equity, what does that mean to help those school leaders out? Because for me, it's kind of personal, because I went to a kind of cross-sector kind of class with 10 principals, and I think one of your people was in there. So we were in the same class, and we talked about how sometimes it comes across so inequitable that charter schools have this, but DCPS schools don't have this. This is one of those instances where it's very inequitable in the sense of we're already, as KIP, we're already talking about this. I'm in communications with our communication. We're really prepared to see how this is all going to roll out. And then we're going to really wrap our arms around each one of our schools and provide them. But what happens to DCPS schools? What happens to, my friend that's at Turner Elementary School? That's probably going to get a 1 star. What happens to my friend that's at Henley? That's probably going to get a 1 star. I know that that young lady that's down there, and all the work that she puts in every single one, she don't deserve that 1 star. They're doing outstanding things. The minute that star drops, it's like punching her in the gut. It's like, and you give her nothing. You say, well, we're not set up to help schools individually. But if you're talking about equity, you should be.
So here's where, for charter schools, there's a distinct advantage because we can talk about our mission. So before my school was a tier 1 school, we didn't have the experience of being tier 3, but as a tier 2 school, we had a mission that we could draw as the compelling case for our school. So before I was the founding executive
so I'm accustomed to the mission-driven aspects. Because people are attracted to schools for what you say you can do and for what they see you do. So we talk about a progressive model of education. We talk about welcoming families. So one of the things that I would think the schools that are, come out with 1 or 2 stars need to figure out is, what do you do that you are able to distinguish for your community? Because when you say that you receive parents as a part of the conversation and you engage with parents, my former colleague that you're speaking of, as the principal of our middle school, she established a parent advisory group. And she talked with that group about the school's goals and the family goals. And then when you marry those pieces together, people want to join you. And so people were very gentle on us when we were a tier 2 school because they saw the potential for something bigger that we were trying to accomplish. So for individual schools, DCPS schools, to look at what in their programming they can highlight, look at the distinguishing features for their school, you'll get parents who will want to stay there and grow.
Yeah.
Initially, it's just going to be so much.
Yeah, because, and I agree with that. That's exactly what I was thinking, that DCPS schools, because there are a lot of DCPS schools that are going to be in the low stars. I mean, it's going to be a good enough, even high schools, it's going to be a bulk of it, because there is a rating right now, and when I look at who's in the red, it's a bulk of DCPS high schools are in the red.
A lot of them are east of the river.
And I think we parents, there are certain groups of parents that want a certain thing. Although we want them to have more and think more, they're going to want this. And I, even as a teacher, I want them to get what they want. If they want a school that's going to academically, they're going to have that academic environment of a certain type of caliber, but I want them to pursue that school, and they should be able to do it. Because I've seen environments where a student who is at a certain level comes to a school that's low performing, and then they fall, and then that student is sacrificed just to be inclusive. But I also believe that there are parents who pursue these certain academic schools and they cannot maintain it. Their child can't maintain that environment, and what happens is then that charter school or that highly academic school lets that child go, and then they come back to tier 1 school. So that's where the problem that I have with that is that I do believe that these low star schools, I hate saying that, they should have a program that defines them. Meaning, we are a school that have small classes. We're a school that does behavior interventions. Like they have to push it out there to get those people to stop coming to KIPP if they can't handle that rigor.
Talk about being strategic in addressing their achievement gap.
This is Allison. I want to chime in real quick. So, a couple things. One, it's interesting because I know that, yes, the public transport board has that tier 1 degree system, but the DCPS does have a rating, has been under rating system that parents have been using. And it's been the ESSA classification, the focus to reward. And when you go to the profile, and there are a lot of parents who have been seeing that school was in the red and completely passed it up. And really right now, the thing is instead of red, it'll be 1 star, and instead of green, it'll be 5 stars. What I would offer us, even on the mission thing, like my daughter's school had a STEM partnership before, and they'd like that to be part of the identity of the school, but they need more funding and support for it, and that's not a lack of want or drive on the part of the folks who are there. So I don't think mission is really an issue, but as far as with this a committee, this review culture potentially be helpful. I think a lot of the people who are on the task force, I know I'm certainly one, I'm on the task force because I had an understanding of some of the nuances that would come with this new report card system and the new product system, and I wanted that to be considered. And I don't know that what the solution is going to actually reflect that. And so I wonder if, since this is combined with the parents, community, and school leaders, I wonder if at the very least, I don't know how to say what else is with this is going to be contemporary to this, if at the very least we can get some thoughts documented on, as parents and everyone starting to navigate this new system, what are some of the nuanced considerations that we as members of the community, as parents and educators who have been deeply involved in this process, can offer that they're not going to see when they go. That's what I'm offering.
And I think also, along with that, I think when we're talking about equity, we've talked about the communication aspect of supporting them communication-wise, but we also know that equity basically comes down a lot of times to funding. And if you're a one-star and your percentage of at-risk students are at a particular place, or your IEPs, 504s are at a particular place, we shouldn't just say we're going to give you $1 million over a certain amount of time, because we know that that's not going to really give them what they need. What they really need is support around those students that causes them problems, whether it's school culture or in classroom management, and they need the support around that. So if we're talking about equity, how do we get that equity down to the classroom, to the students, the people that really need it? Does that mean that we're providing those 1 and 2 schools, 2-star schools, with making sure that all the teachers that's there, they have trauma certification, so that they can adequately address those children that are attending that school? I know at Henley, Dr. Sunday probably would really appreciate that, because she's in a community in Ward 8 that has a high percentage of kids that have experienced trauma. So what do they bring? They bring that all there, and now classroom management is very difficult. So if we're going to fight for equity, how do we make sure that Dr. Sunday and that my friend that's at Turner and some of the other schools that are east of the river are receiving the type of support that is needed in the classroom so much? Because where they are right now, they're trying to make decisions, and it's not very ethical. Like any other school that may be in Ward 3 or in Ward 4 and another ward, they're making those decisions, and that's a very hard decision if it's just, you guys have equal funding, but it's not equitable funding. And we're supposed to be about equitable funding for those schools that really need the most support in their schools, that are in the classrooms where those kids actually are at every single day.
This is a major part of the problem now, because we're hearing that, $300,000 going to a school, that $300,000 can easily go precisely to waste if there's not a thoughtful way of, because it's not, the money is certainly a factor, but part of it has to do with the climate at the school that the teachers experience.
Right.
Part of it is the climate at the school that the families experience, and the children experience. And being able to take a systematic look. I'm using the term mission-driven, but really it's about claiming that opportunity that your school presents for a child. And the schools can, I believe that the teachers and the families, and depending on the age of the population, the kids can be involved in helping to identify what you can claim at that school is what you can offer for the community. There's intimate knowledge of the community. There's dedication and commitment to the community. These are pieces that, when you look at the stars of the school, you would be able to find, I'm pretty sure you'd be able to find discontent parents in every school, no matter what number of stars. It's the way that it is, the community is cultivated.
Exactly, and I don't think the schools that are in my community that will probably receive 1 or 2 stars, that those parents are not proud of their schools or want to be proud of their schools. What they want to know is how you're addressing my child's need. So if you have a high percentage of at-risk kids and you have a high percentage of IEPs and 504s and stuff like that, there's no shame in that. The shame is that you're not addressing it. So how are you addressing it? Because I can be a 1 or 2-star school as long as you're addressing the needs of my child. And I think that's where we're losing the equitable kind of communication aspect to it, to say, okay, yes, you got a 1 or 2 star because of these particular items that happen, but this is how we're going to address some of the things that you may be doing well and to address some of the things that got you to this one star. I don't think we're really talking about how people are getting these 1 stars and what we're going to do.
At least not for the schools that aren't part of that CS1 ranking.
Right.
Because the CS1 ranking, you know, $300,000, too much, too little.
So we're talking 10 schools, 10, 11 schools.
Exactly, but that's not even close to the amount of schools who will get all 1, 2, or
I can do that.
3.
I can do that driving up Alabama Avenue. I can point out
But
10
do they
schools that
have
need.
do they have other fundings that maybe can target it to?
Well, the at-risk
to
funding,
that?
I mean, how is that at-risk funding being used? Because
Sorry, I'm laughing just because I went to PCSB last week for the meeting, and this was a source of great consternation. So,
But can we recommend something like that? Like how, like?
that's what I don't understand. What can our role be? Who is going to listen to us?
Maybe that's a good place for me to jump in.
Yes.
Like,
Go right ahead.
So I think that the ESSA task force, and especially as 2019 rolls around, the power that this task force has, to me, is a lot like the power that the State Board of Education has, which is to say it represents an independent voice, it's a community voice, and it's a big platform. Sometimes that can be, sometimes the statutory authority it ends there, right? But at the minimum, it is an elected voice that's independent from mayoral control, and it's and as such, I think it has credibility and it has some traction with media, with the community, together, and collectively as the 29 members of the task force, the reach is pretty broad. So my thought, and this is just my personal thought, was that that's a good place to begin when you're thinking about how you want to approach messaging in the community is like, there is some platform there, and we as an agency can get behind you in terms of whether it's communications or trying to coordinate an event or release a document or publicize something. That's something that we can definitely work to boost you up there.
I think that I was sitting here thinking about all the things we were talking about in terms of what does a school leader need to do when they find themselves in this situation, and all of the different factors that come into play. This is about equity in that people will choose with their feet, but it's also about equity, and I'm hearing Jock a lot saying in terms of we know that there are some factors that lead to these inequities in the city, and that they are citywide.
Yeah.
So a part of me is thinking about how does a school leader, without raising the ire of the LEA that they're a part of, frame the messaging to say, this is our mission, this is what we're doing well, this is what we're growing on, and where we need your support as a family, and we'll help and make sure your student has equity. But how do we get that school leader to help their families change the messaging out? This isn't our school not providing you with equity, this is our city not providing you with equity. And I think if our idea is that we are an independent body of voices, I'm so sorry, my bosses are probably watching on Twitter.
And he's filming right here.
That's where we have leverage. That's where we can say to parents, here's a guidance document that OSSE sent you about what is the STARS movement. But here are the questions that you should ask not your school principal, but your LEA leader and your city official.
So what?
I don't know, whatever you all talk about.
So everybody's gonna start coming back together.
We always make Alex do it, and he hates it, but we always make Alex report out. So thank you, Alex.
This is great at pulling out.
Thank you, Alex.
And also, if this is a conversation that you want to continue between now and, I would like to be like simple level to next time we could explore it, if we wanted, whether it's finding other time or just like carry on an email thread or anything like that, if I can set that up.
I'll be super direct in saying that I'm happy to do that, but I think the guidance needs to come from SBOE.
Okay.
So,
You got it?
feel free to give me at
Yeah,
least.
this is Allison. I'm gonna sign off, so I'll catch the report out in a minute. Feel free to email me that.
Will do.
So I was couldn't understand what she was saying.
I didn't say anything.
No, I was trying to say, I didn't understand her, she was breaking up.
Hi, sorry.
You took either Laura or someone's spot.
Wait a minute, she's still breaking up, did you do it?
She's signing off.
Oh, he's signing off? Bye.
Hi, I'm signing off.
All right, night, thank you.
And I'm on the day.
I got it all.
Yeah, I noticed that part.
I like it.
Thank you. It is poofy. It's probably more poofy than it was in
It happens. People. How long has it been since you had it?
3 years since I cut it.
Wow. Yeah, it feels really cold, I'm sure.
I'm in a very cold climate location. So this is always too warm for me.
They're coming. They need an hour. Yeah, so I said that.
This is with me. I know where else to put it.
What are we doing in December meeting? We're not talking about committees. So I'll start reading.
Yeah, I'll start it. I think depending on the readiness of, timeline for when it drops, I think, it's probably gonna be a lot of work already related. So, but.
Yeah, yeah, that's what they told us, and that's what.
Got it, that makes sense. That pretty much defines my life, right?
Yeah.
They'll be so happy, yes.
Right.
They'll be so happy.
I made 3 SSR decks today, just today.
That's good.
Teachers cabinet tomorrow, parent forum on Thursday.
It's gonna be here before the holiday.
I actually have a countdown on my computer, I was not just harassing them. I have a work day countdown and then a day countdown. Like business days versus.
What's this from?
Look at.
You want it?
You wanna go to the next one? I can also do it for him.
Yeah, we're ready.
I begin every ESSA
We have
meeting.
One more. I know we only have 3, so we only have 1.
I begin every ESSA meeting with the countdown, which people don't find reassuring for. Particularly when it's like our 4th ESSA meeting of the day, and they're like, the number actually hasn't changed since the last 3 times you told us. And I'm like, I just want to make sure everyone feels the kind of pressure. Yes.
I hope I do better tomorrow night. At least I'll be able to talk. I hope. This time. Like I said, I got up at 5 o'clock.
Where did you fly from? Like, you didn't have a direct flight? You didn't have a direct flight from
Yeah,
Kansas
we had a
State?
direct flight. My husband didn't set the alarm. Very jumped up. We got the hour difference in time. We had a direct flight, yes, we did.
I mean, even as a teacher, I remember it's like pleasure, just that, what they told me at school.
We're a lot more supportive.
Thank you, John Paul, you did good on that. I mean, even I understood, and I had no background in that. That was not my committee. Budget is not my thing, budgets are not my thing.
My thinking that.
I know, but you know more about the line.
Try.
I love it.
Talking about the, like, big picture stuff. But
The nitty-gritty?
the actual spending part of it, I want to see.
I like spending too. But I have to say, this campus is a lot cheaper than DC.
Housing, right?
everything.
Yeah.
You can get the best meal for like $4, $5. Yeah,
Wait till Amazon comes.
I know.
Bridge to nowhere is gonna make everything even
Like
more
they have some
expensive.
fantastic houses that we guesstimate the cost of the house. They talk about $500. I mean, big old. I'm like, that house would be too big. $500. It's still not a lot of money. I'm talking about a huge house. Gas is cheap. Right. It's a feel myself. I could have a very different lifestyle there. Or my maybe my
Yeah, where I'm from. Like, really nice homes.
But I was happy that there was more than the way they were
Yeah. I like it. Is that still true though? I mean, property values are going
It's not me, Josh.
Right, exactly.
You ready to stay the test next time? We'll call it a people. Rita, we call it committees for Rita?
Yes, we agree.
Go back. All right, so the academic equity committee,
Yeah.
to do your report out.
I don't understand.
Yeah, Matt?
You think you just stay?
No.
The viewers would love
Yes,
it.
Matt said no.
Okay, but I'll go with that. So I think for the academic equity committee, we did a little bit of the question of what's our purpose, right? And one of the things we all came out with is that we wanted to make sure that whatever we did had impact and it had utility after our time. So we talked a little bit about what could be deliverables that would be realistic in the 6-month period. We kind of brainstormed a few different things, namely that we could provide some research questions that could be used for by the research consortium once that came up, and really having that be something that could live past this committee, this work group. We talked a little bit about looking at what types of opportunities and resources were out there in terms of things that were working in other school districts for where there was academic achievement issues, and doing some research on best practices elsewhere. But we also, at a certain point in time, started talking about the $11 million and basically the schools that were going to come up as having the lowest performance rates. And really, we kind of got in this conversation about $11 million was not going to be enough to do what needed to be done, and that that there was going to really be a much bigger need that these schools were going to have, and what, and really what should we do about that, and really kind of talking about how could we as a committee help get underneath that. So when the names of the schools came out, what could we learn from those schools about, how they got to the place that they were in terms of performance, what their challenges were, and also were there resources and things that we could bring forward that would help them as they're looking to move and make improvements. And so I think that's pretty much where we got, was a commitment to working with those particular schools and trying to provide some type of resources that could help, or working with the board to provide resources to those schools. And we thought that that could have an impact, and hopefully also maybe making some more suggestions about what other supports would be needed, to bolster up that $11 million, because again, we just think that that's going to be insufficient to make any change. But my committee should jump in. I missed something. Josh, Beverly, other people.
Julie, you did a great job, thank you.
I think that's a perfect segue to the School Resources and Funding Committee, because we're tackling, I think that's a good segue. Laura?
Alright, so our budget section of the report card, to make it more informational and to drive the causes of equity. We first kind of talked about, should we be looking at inputs versus outputs? Should we try to do both? Is that too much to look at both? I don't know if we necessarily 100% came down on one side on that, but kind of our conversation shifted mostly towards inputs. So really just trying to identify, for all the LEAs, what could we report about where the money's coming from that is clear, both kind of federal, local, state, but also then conversation around private in terms of PPOs as well as outside partners that schools have big grants with, because that's also a big part of the money that schools have access to. And then we kind of talked about how much should we be reporting, like should we get super into the weeds with the report, like exactly where the money's coming from? Should it be more big picture, like it's just this percentage is private funding? And also, should we be breaking it down by like how much was allocated specifically for special education and for at-risk, and then breaking that apart for every LEA on the report card, kind of in a really clear manner that all the schools use. But ultimately, our question is kind of what does it mean to be transparent? What are we looking for? And then ultimately, how do we apply that? Or how could we apply that to the report card with the goal of trying to drive funding equity and expose, and trying to, for our whole city, expose where there's holes that maybe we weren't noticing because it looks like things are okay, and they're not really okay.
And meeting plan.
I think, sounds like had a lot of the same discourses, a lot of the groups about where to start and how to best support, and ultimately I think rested on the kind of personalities that we have in the group being some school leaders and LEA leaders as well, and leveraging that to talk about how do we provide support to messaging to school leaders who maybe do end up with that 1 or 2 star rating, and how do we support those LEA leaders in best practices in messaging to their communities, not only to their parents, but also to the larger kind of DC community about what does this star rating really mean for equity for your student and for us as a school and for us as a city, and really kind of helping parents focus on exactly what we're talking about in terms of these last couple of groups in funding. Not just what can your school do to promote equity, but what can the city do more of to help promote equity for all students. So that's where our head is headed. Did I miss anything, Committee?
Okay, so our next steps are to look at the recommendations or the things that came up today and be ready when we come back in December to delve into this. Yeah, Tuesday, December the 11th at 6 o'clock, same time, same station. Probably OSSE will take the majority of that meeting with the final report card stuff. But if we have time, we'll break out and try to concentrate on this a little more. But if not, January, come prepared to put some meat on the bones that we need. And with that,
I think I was just going to say, I do expect OSSE to take the majority of the time to talk about what the data from the report card so that we can understand it and learn from it. But I do think that maybe taking 15 minutes after retreating our groups, just like to get initial thoughts for from that data, does that change what we talked about today at all?
On the report card or
on our committee, 15 minutes with our committee.
Okay, well, we can do that.
To be does that change what we talked about today in terms of the things that we want to do?
Okay, so that means that at a certain time you'll have to stop asking questions of OSSE so we have time to do that.
Sorry, you can just put them on Twitter, right?
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, I'm not saying that we can't do that. I'm just saying that if we want to do that as a group, and I have no problem with doing that, then we stop the time to allow us to do it. So let me know, and I will come.
Okay.
Okay. consensus of the group, if you want to do that, we can tell us if we want the last 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Okay. Any other comments, questions? Thank you all for coming out. And I'll see you on the 11th, same time, same place, and we'll have some more of these wonderful